Why are these green tomatoes not getting ripe this year? There's all kinds of discussion online this year, and many people are frustrated. They finally have tomatoes and they're green. It's also generated a lot of online videos on YouTube. But a lot of the information in those videos is wrong. Now, I've been growing tomatoes for 50 years, so I know a thing or two about tomatoes. I've also written a book, a 75-page ebook called Growing Great Tomatoes, and you can get a copy of that for free on my website. There's a link to it below. In this program, I want to explain why the tomatoes aren't ripening, what you can do about it. Can you pick them green and will they ripen indoors? And then I'm going to have a look at pruning tomatoes in general and how does that affect ripening. Probably the biggest reason for green tomatoes not ripening is the temperature. If the temperature is too low or too high, your green tomatoes just won't ripen. The process of ripening is a chemical reaction. There is chemistry taking place inside the tomato, and all chemical reactions are controlled by temperature. There's a sweet spot for them taking place. In the case of ripening tomatoes, the sweet spot is between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, or 21 and 24 degrees centigrade. As the temperature goes outside this range, the chemical reactions slow down. Now, if you're a little bit outside the range, that's still okay. They'll still ripen. It'll just be a slower process. If you're too far out this range, the process just stops. At 85 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees centigrade, ripening stops. The fruit will remain on the bush. It'll be green and it'll just sit there forever. Now, what can you do about this? Well, if it's due to high temperatures, you can try shading your plant. And if this is a recurring problem, then maybe you should try planting your tomatoes in a shadier spot next year. But shade will reduce the temperature, and a few degrees can make a big difference. Now, on the cold end, it's a little harder to warm them up, but covering them overnight might help to keep the nighttime temperature higher. What about fertilizer? I see a lot of people online saying that too much fertilizer can stop your fruit from ripening. That's not really correct. I mean, sure, really excess amounts might cause you a problem, but having higher levels of nitrogen in your soil won't stop the fruit from developing. Now, if you have very high levels of nitrogen early in the year, you might not get as much fruit developing, but that's a different problem. In this case, we have fruit, it's just not turning red. Fertilizer is not going to help the problem, and excess fertilizer isn't preventing the ripening. How about light? A lot of people think that the tomatoes need light to ripen. I mean, we associate the red colored tomatoes with the red color of the sun, and it seems logical that the two need to match. Turns out, tomatoes don't need any light to ripen. So some people are recommending to cut a lot of the leaves off so the light can get in here. That won't affect the ripening process because it has nothing to do with light. Now, the same thing happens if we take this fruit indoors. You don't have to put it on a windowsill because it doesn't need light. So light isn't important here. Once the flower is pollinated, it takes 6 to 8 weeks for the fruit to develop and ripen. There's a bit of variation there because it depends on climate and water and on the cultivar you're growing, but it's somewhere in that range. If your flowers were pollinated later in the season, you can expect the fruit to be ready later in the season. And that's what happened to me. Just as the plants were ready to grow and flower in the spring, we had some crappy weather, and a lot of flowers didn't get pollinated, so our fruit is kind of delayed. Some people are just too impatient for that ripe tomato. Fruit also ripens slower when the plant is under stress. Now we're talking about extremes. Very dry, very high humidity. Something that really stresses the plant could slow down ripening because the plant now focuses on staying alive and it doesn't focus on ripening the fruit. But I'm assuming you know how to grow tomatoes and you're not stressing them, you're taking care of them. So that's not an issue either. In most cases, if your fruit is not ripening, it's a temperature issue. And there's limited things you can do about that. Now let's talk about a completely different problem. What if you don't have any fruit or you don't have very much fruit? Now we have a pollination problem. The flowers are developing, but they're not setting fruit. That is also a temperature problem. and a humidity problem. When the temperature is too low or too high, or the humidity is too high, the flowers won't set fruit because the pollen doesn't work correct. Now that has nothing to do with green tomatoes. My problem here is I have lots of green tomatoes. They're just not ripening. But you can see that even the pollination is affected by temperature. Let's ask a different question. I have tomatoes. They're full size. They're ready to go. Can I harvest them? Can I ripen them inside? And a lot of the information I see online here is incorrect. So before I discuss it, we need to understand two different terms here. The first one is a stage of development called green mature. The tomato has developed to its full size, but the outside is completely green. Now the inside is starting to show some color, but you won't know that unless you cut one of these open. That's the green mature stage. Now I see a lot of people online saying, well, once you've reached that stage, you can harvest these and ripen them indoors. That doesn't work. If you collect at the green mature stage, they won't ripen off the vine. Now they may get a bit of color developing, but you won't get a proper ripening process. They won't taste proper, and they will never get full coloration. Now there's another stage that comes after the green mature stage, and that's called the breaker stage. The fruit is still mostly green, but it now has some orangey red coloration, usually at the blossom end. That's the breaker stage. Once the fruit reaches that stage, the plant is finished with the ripening process. It's no longer sending chemicals into the fruit, so there's no reason to keep it on the plant. If you harvest at that stage and take it inside, you will get fully ripe tomatoes and they will have full flavor. In fact, I do that all the time because I get to them before the chipmunks and the squirrels. They also wait for red fruit. So I sneak out here, get it in the breaker stage, sneak it inside before they can get it. One last topic that's important to understand. How does pruning affect ripening? And again, there's lots of myths out there. Some people want to prune so that fruit ripens. Other people want to take a lot of the leaves off because the leaves have too much nitrogen in them and that's preventing ripening. Neither of those statements are correct. Pruning does affect ripening, but only if you prune earlier on in the season. So what happens to the plant is that you prune a lot of leaves off. The plant actually makes less fruit because you've been pruning it. The fruit develops a little larger and ripens a little bit sooner. If you don't prune, your crop tends to ripen a little bit later. You get more tomatoes, but they tend to be a little bit on the smaller size. Both methods work quite well. To understand the effect of pruning in more detail, have a look at this video right here. And if you want to know how I grow tomatoes, get a copy of my book, Growing Great Tomatoes, and there's a link in the description for that. Or watch this video over here. Happy gardening.